Hello, this is my active audience. If one of my audience members wouldn't mind holding. My name is Wade Lyons, and I'm doing a speech video on a demonstration of the process of gasification. I learned earlier that I screwed up in my setup a little bit, so let me explain that for a moment. Basically what I did was I modified my mom's lawnmower so that instead of the two tubes on this mower that are receiving gas and air, I basically reversed which one is getting which. So instead of one tube getting gas, it is now getting air. Instead of the other tube getting air, it's now getting gas. But the problem that I came in with is that this clear tube right here is going directly into the carburetor that's designated on this gas tank, but it's not closed off, so there's still airflow going into it. You need to be able to have a complete restriction of airflow. That way you can control the amount of air and fuel going into your gas tank. Into your engine. But so you're all aware, my audience members are able to verify for me that this was running. It did crank over, but because of the way I have it set up now, it's not safe to try to crank over and continuously run for this demonstration.
Yep, it was running. Yep.
Basically, for this concept, I've learned that to increase your MPGs, you need to have a higher amount of airflow than your gas flow into your engine. But to make that happen, you need to create fumes or vapors, and that's what this setup does. Basically, what I did was I took this little tiny jar, I cut 3 holes into the top. This long one that goes directly to the engine is only about level with this the cap right here. That's so that it's sitting up as high as it possibly can, and when all the fumes rise, it all goes straight into this tube. These two are cut off near the bottom of the glass right here, and they're angled off at roughly a 45-degree angle. So basically the tube is no longer straight, it's now cut off, and there's this whole open airway right here. That is supposed to keep the airflow constant. This way, if there's anything on bottom, it won't clog either of these tubes and prevent it from churning the gas and the air fuel to make the fumes. So now, if there's anything on the bottom, which looks like there just is, you really don't need much more than this little amount of gas right here to be able to churn all the gas, to be able to help the engine pistons constantly flow, sucking in more air in through these tubes, churning the gas, making more fumes, going right through this tube, right into the carburetor, which goes right into the engine and causes the explosion. But since you're going to need more fumes to be able to keep the engine flowing, because it can't run on air, it has to have a combustible source, hence the reason why the spark plug's here. That is the reason why I glued this mason jar right next to the exhaust. The exhaust, as most people know, is very hot. It creates a lot of heat. Well, these little holes are pushing all this hot air directly onto this glass, which the more heat you have, the more fumes are likely to occur. So as these two tubes are sucking in air, causing more airflow, and the heat going in, causing more rapid expansion of the gas from liquid to gaseous state, you're creating this giant vortex of nothing but fumes that goes directly into the engine. This way you increase the amount of fuel going in, but only to the point where it's mixed with the air, not towards liquid fuel. Liquid fuel is actually very horrible for our engines, hence the reason why you have to get oil changes, you have to clean out your cars, your carburetor, you actually have to clean your engine. But the less fuel that you use in what is known as gas, straight up gasoline from your local gas station, is horrible. This stuff does not burn at proper rate, hence the reason why I made this setup. But instead of cranking it over, it's easier to explain it, and the possibility fix this situation. So I'd have to close this off, restrict it, controlling the amount of fuel going into the tank, and I leave the gas tank open, so that way it creates a suction which already goes directly into the carburetor. Well, the more air that goes into this, the better. But since I don't have an air filter, I shouldn't crank it over, because you don't want to get dirt, grime, or anything like that inside your engine, which will cause you to have to clean your engine. So this air filter is no longer usable right now because of the setup that I have, But if I were to close this carburetor off with only this tube in it, it would create a direct suction of the fuel from this into there, no airflow whatsoever. But this gas tank right here, which is now empty, I'd have to put some sort of air filter in it. That way the muck and the grime can go directly into the entrance, but all the air will be clean coming out into the carburetor, which goes directly into the engine. After doing the math on it, I figured out that most car engines these days, whether it be a carburetor or a fuel injector, are getting roughly a 10 to a 1 air to fuel ratio, which is actually horrible on engines. That's taking in more parts per gallon of fuel than need be, and some even go as low as 2 to 1 air to fuel. That may not seem so bad, but you got to realize that is 1 part per million fuel, and I'm not talking liquid. I'm talking straight up fuel. Just this little bit of gas in here to air mixture. So the higher your air to fuel mixture, the more air that's going into the engine, the more efficient your car is running. Because air is explosive. Oxygen is explosive, but it has to have an igniting source, i.e. the gas. Gas is highly explosive. So is hydrogen, so is diesel. Basically anything that's a combustible source is good on a combustion engine. So don't believe your gas companies or the oil companies out there telling you that you have to run your car on just plain old gas, or that any one of those 3 that you find at the gas station, whether it be 87, 89, or 91, or any of the above, any sort of fuel system, won't matter what kind of gas you put into it, as long as you're putting in some sort of combustible source. But it is true to the fact that the higher content of gas that you're putting in your tank, that has less water at the gas station. That's the only reason why those numbers are designated there, is the amount of water that's in there within it, making it more soluble, making it flow a little more easily. That's what makes your engine cleaner or more efficient. So the higher amount of gas, the cleaner it's going to be. Lower amount of water, it's a lot easier to work with, but it corrodes your engine so much more easily. But basically the concept of this is you decrease the amount of gasoline forcibly by the suction of air, which lets the air continuously flow and suck in a specified amount, and you let the air filter take in as much air as it possibly can and suck in to give you more of an efficient running engine. Now this can be done with carburetors, fuel injectors, basically any form of ignition system that you have in your vehicle, but the most efficient is to do something like this, which is called a gasification, which is just like I explained, these 2 tubes sucking in air, churning it, letting the heat build up from the exhaust, and going straight into that longer tube directly into the carburetor, causing the explosion. There's more into this, but the basic concept is you can do this to any vehicle as long as you take out the fuel injector, carburetor, and fuel pump. If you take out those 3 main machines, you're actually going to, and do your own setup like this, something similar to this, you're actually increasing your MPGs dramatically. Gas companies don't want you to know this, but it's completely possible. If you want to see that in further information, or you have any other further questions, feel free to look on my YouTube page. I am going to continue this project, not just on this, but on something as simple as my truck, which is running on a V6 engine. But this can run on any engine. It doesn't matter how many valves or how many pistons you have, as long as you have a combustion engine, i.e. a spark plug going directly to an enclosed space, you have a combustible engine that can run efficiently on this. All you have to do is have enough fumes to start it up. And that is the conclusion of my speech. Thank you very much for listening.